They woke me mid-descent, bodies still locked in cryosleep and nerves unraveling 1 degree at a time. No sound but the slow hiss of pressure modulation as the capsule skated frictionless through atmospheric entry. The walls inside were gunmetal ceramic, lined with anti-spall baffles that hadn't been cleaned since whoever prepped the drop decided no one would live long enough to notice. The cold stayed in the marrow longer than it should have, the kind of deep ache that comes from being put away like old gear and dragged back into circulation without warning. The stasis collar retracted with a soft hydraulic click, and I found myself staring at the inside of a face shield that hadn't been mine when I went under. Generic combat visor, HUD flickering on a delay, as if the system wasn't entirely sure it wanted me awake yet. Welcome back, Corporal Dax Stroud. Mission time, 3 hours 17 minutes and 41 seconds. Descent trajectory nominal, surface contact in 9 minutes. They didn't even give me the date. I twisted my neck, slow at first. The actuator on the left shoulder joint of the exo harness creaked with age, or maybe with disuse. Same for my back. Scar tissue tugging along the spine where they'd shaved the bone, too close to install the neural suppression node. Old ache, familiar. The kind that reminded you what you were before they reclassified you as equipment. Across the capsule's narrow hold, the other 3 were waking too. One by one, their cryo collars blinked green, detached with an audible sigh. The one to my right, taller, heavy-framed, stayed still longer than the others. Even as the restraints disengaged, he remained seated, eyes closed. I recognized him from the briefing packets, or what little of them they hadn't redacted. Seth, the quiet hammer, former siege corps, ritualistic, efficient. No confirmed civilian kills, because civilian status on Triton was a matter of paperwork, and that paperwork had a tendency to go missing when Seth was deployed. His hands rested palm up on his thighs, fingers scarred and calloused. Burn scars, the ritual kind. He wasn't meditating, he was listening. For what, I didn't ask. The one already moving, disengaging restraints before the others were even conscious, was Muir. They called him Locke, short for locksmith, but he moved like someone who'd already picked this scenario apart a dozen times before we even boarded. Wiry build, like he'd grown into his frame sideways. Hazel eyes scanning everything, even in half-light. Fingers twitching near his right wrist, where an old data jack glinted beneath the skin, like a parasite that had made peace with its host. He didn't speak either, just nodded once to me, curt, like a mechanic confirming a tool still worked. Then there was Miles, sitting opposite, back straight, posture stiff even as the harness let go. He blinked like someone who hadn't been in cryo at all. His armor was cleaner than the rest of ours, sleek, custom-cut plating with discreet inlays and a biometric tag that didn't match any rank I recognized. He adjusted the analog wristwatch on his left arm like it meant something, even here. That was Miles in a word, deliberate. He wasn't from the initiative, not like us, not pulled from the box with a debt of blood and silence. He was here to watch, or to judge, or maybe both. None of us had spoken since waking, but the silence wasn't awkward. It was procedural. We were all trained not to talk until there was something worth saying. The capsule shuddered around us, inertial buffers catching the worst of the entry G-forces. Outside, I imagined the sky turning orange and green as the friction layers hit Gorgon 4's atmospheric mix. Unstable, thin near the poles, thick with hydrocarbon fogs near the equator. We were headed for the southern hemisphere, temperate band, old colony coordinates. Locke finally broke the silence, leaning forward as his wrist lit up with a flickering diagnostics array. Altitude telemetry says we're dropping too clean. Seth opened his eyes. No reaction, just stillness. Miles didn't look up. Clean's what we want. Clean doesn't mean right, Locke replied. No atmospheric drift, no thermal bleed on approach vector. Zero dust saturation on the outer hull, which either means the colony's still running active sweep fields. He glanced up at me. Or we're flying into a sterilized box. The capsule jolted once more, then began the final burn. I felt the artificial gravity stabilize, subtle as a held breath. The HUD flashed amber. Surface contact, 1 minute. No one tells you what re-entry smells like after cryo. It's not fire or smoke. It's metal, old, synthetic, sharp at the back of the throat. The kind of smell you associate with launch tubes and emergency evacuations, with blood soaked into insulation foam, with hatches that closed too fast behind you. Burn depth, we used to call it. That lingering stink of a thing passing through heat and friction and silence, too fast to scream. The capsule locked into a vertical hold position, impact struts engaging. A voice, not one of ours, spoke over the internal channel, flat, female, emotionless. "Welcome to Gorgon 4. Surface conditions stable. External power detected. Atmospheric cycle nominal. Colony heartbeat active." Heartbeat. Locke and I exchanged a glance. That word wasn't standard. Not in any of the old ECC colony AI protocols. Systems were supposed to report atmospheric status, not biology metaphors. Miles said nothing, just unlatched his harness, stood and waited for the hatch to cycle. When the outer seal opened, the world beyond was night-black rock and industrial lighting. No one met us. No security, no auto-turrets, no bodies. Just the main airlock of Gorgon 4's colony dome, fully powered, doors wide, as if we'd been expected. I stepped out first. The ground was ribbed steel mesh laid over bedrock. The air tasted dry but breathable, engineered, not organic. Somewhere deep within the facility, I heard ventilation running, smooth and uninterrupted. That was wrong. No station this size ran Atmos full-time if no one was breathing it. Energy cost alone would have triggered shutdown protocols after 2 weeks. This place had been dark for 6 months. Miles activated a beacon, an old one, analog transmission. No uplink. ECC didn't want data streamed out. I wondered if it was because they feared what might get in, or what might come back. "Fan out," I ordered. "Silent recon, 5-minute circuit." They moved without a word. Locke peeled off left, slipping between loading cranes and idle cargo haulers. Seth went right, toward the old mineral processing towers. Miles stayed near the entrance, running diagnostics on the dome structure, his lips moving without sound. I walked straight ahead into the colony's central concourse. Transparent alloy overhead, smeared by time and the acidic atmosphere outside. Rows of equipment, mining suits, atmospheric compressors, pressure sealers, stood where they'd been left. None of them showed signs of panic or evacuation. No tool was dropped, no locker forced open. It looked like someone had called for a lunch break and forgotten to call them back. I crouched near a portable med station, dust on the casing, no power indicator. I brushed a finger along the interface. The panel blinked to life instantly. Green, active. Bioscan accepted. Operator Stroud. I froze. That wasn't a generic activation. That was keyed. Somewhere in the system, someone had seeded my biometric data into the colony's access tree. I tapped comms. "Locke, did you preload any of our files into the local net?" "Negative. I haven't even cracked their base frame yet. Why?" It just called me by name. Static silence for a second. Then Locke's voice, colder. "Repeat that." "Biostation recognized my ID. No login, just activated." Another beat. Then Miles's voice cut in. "You were selected for a reason, Corporal. Don't act surprised that the system was briefed." "Briefed by who?" But he didn't answer. I stood, eyes tracking the hallway that led deeper into the HAB dome. Doors lined either side. Medical, administrative, rec quarters. Lights on in every one, not a flicker. Full power. The hallway was silent, but too evenly so. Like the space itself was waiting. Locke came back 10 minutes later, hands empty, eyes twitching in that way he had when he was running diagnostics in his head. Perimeters clear, storage bays sealed but intact, environmental systems purring like someone's tuning them by hand. No signs of entry breach, no sign of anything living or dead. Seth arrived behind him, calm and wordless. He held up a hand and unfurled 2 fingers. two sealed corridors in the outer ring, both temperature regulated. No signs of struggle. He had laid small charges at the sealed doors, just in case. Miles joined us last, still calm, still silent. He looked around like someone measuring the weight of a dream. "We set base camp here," he said. "This dome, no digging, not until we log preliminary diagnostics and full recon. You've got 72 hours. After that, we go below." I turned toward him. Below what? His gaze was steady, cold. Gorgon 4 was more than a colony, you'll see. I didn't nod, just stared at him until he turned away. He knew what was beneath this place. He'd known since before we dropped, and they'd sent us here to find it, not as a rescue op, not even to secure the colony. We weren't here to fix anything. We were here to see what happened when the past opened its mouth and found something still alive to feed it. And I was starting to wonder if Command ever expected any of us to come back. I didn't sleep that first cycle. None of us did, far as I could tell. The dome stayed too bright, too functional for anything resembling rest. Fluorescent tubes along the curved ceiling maintained their regulated glow, dipping only slightly into a muted amber when the system decided it was night. We never set a sleep schedule. Miles hadn't issued one, and I wasn't about to impose command structure over a team full of men who'd all served time for breaking it. Instead, we drifted. Locke disappeared into the auxiliary systems, cracking his way through interface panels like they owed him money. Seth cleaned his gear in the corner of the intake corridor methodically, like he was preparing for a ceremony no one else had been invited to. Miles took a high perch overlooking the concourse, some security tower that hadn't been used in years, and watched us through old surveillance feeds he'd somehow booted back into life. I pretended not to notice. I spent the quiet hours walking the Hab Dome perimeter, scanning for anything that didn't match the old ECC blueprints I'd pulled from the drop capsule's archives. There were discrepancies, small at first. A corridor here that curved instead of branching. A maintenance hatch sealed over with freshly welded plates, too clean to be decades old, too inconsistent with standard issue to have been factory default. Someone had been here after the colony went dark. By the third cycle, Locke found the shaft. He didn't announce it, didn't yell or ping us, just showed up in the main dome wearing that half-amused, half-concerned look that always made it hard to tell whether we were about to learn something important or get killed trying. He gestured for me and Seth to follow. Miles trailed behind, unspeaking but ever present. We crossed through a bulkhead sealed by emergency code, a door lock bypassed using an old ECC dev kit he'd pieced together from spare connectors and a cracked personnel badge. I asked him where he found the badge. He said it wasn't in the system. Not that it didn't work, just that whoever it belonged to had never existed on paper. The shaft was buried beneath the geothermal relay station. On the maps, that space was flagged as empty infrastructure. What we saw when we pried up the floor plating wasn't a foundation pit or unused pipe trench. It was a freight elevator, 50 feet across, circular, and sealed with concentric layers of carbon steel and hex-locked anchors. No manual access ports, no call panel. It was as if the only way down had always been from above. Locke crouched at the edge, running a scanner wand along the perimeter. He didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then, "Power's active, very low draw. Something down there's still sipping current." "How deep?" I asked. He shrugged. "No idea. Scanner returns flat below 40 meters, like it's absorbing signal instead of bouncing it." "Shielded?" "More like digesting it." Seth knelt beside the freight plate, pressing one open palm to the surface. He didn't speak either, just closed his eyes and exhaled. After a moment, he opened them again, meeting mine with a calm that somehow made it worse. "It breathes," he said. I looked to Locke, who gave a shrug that could have meant anything. Miles didn't react. He just walked a slow circle around the shaft, studying the ground like it might rearrange itself if given enough time. He stopped near a wall-mounted junction box, one of the original relay points from the colony's construction era. He pulled a tool from his belt, popped it open, and scanned the contents. Then he frowned. There's no command line connecting this junction to the shaft's control cluster. That means it wasn't installed with the rest of the colony. I stepped beside him, looking at the exposed wiring. It was braided, insulated with a weave I didn't recognize, denser than anything we used for civilian-grade builds. The kind of tech you'd only find in skunkworks facilities or buried R&D contracts, places ECC denied ever existed. Miles closed the panel slowly. "This wasn't added later," he said. "This was always meant to be here. They just never put it on the public maps." I felt it then. That familiar shift behind the sternum, like being assigned to a mission you already know won't make the return brief. A cold clarity, a narrowing of possibilities. "We going down?" Locke asked. "We're here," I said. "Might as well finish the walk." We didn't breach the shaft that day. I ordered a full survey of the surrounding infrastructure first. Every corridor, heat duct and power junction within a 100-meter radius. I'd followed orders blind once, and half my unit got buried under ice for it. Never again. What gnawed at me wasn't just the shaft or the power draw or the way the plates had been welded to look temporary when they were anything but. It was the feeling, heavy and familiar, crawling the base of my skull like a trigger left half pulled. I'd seen a facility like this once before, classified red on black, buried off-chart under a comm satellite array on Titan. Different name, different doctrine, but the architecture. The signals that didn't register on standard diagnostics. The way it treated people like inputs, not occupants. That was the kind of place they buried under double null clearance and then swore never existed. We had a term for sites like that. Used it in whispers when command wasn't listening. Deep black, not a code name, a grave marker. I didn't know for sure what waited under Gorgon 4, but I'd been close enough to something like it to feel the shape it left behind. And whatever this place had been before it was scrubbed from every colonial map, it fit. The silence, the systems still running with no one to serve, the way the shaft felt less like an elevator and more like a descent into something that never stopped listening. If it wasn't deep black in name, it was in purpose. And that was enough for me to start calling it what it was. It had waited this long, it would wait one more day. We set a perimeter. Seth planted signal dampeners and localized echo repeaters, locking the space into a dead zone. If anything down there was listening, it wouldn't hear us talk. If it was watching, it wouldn't see clean. Locke and I ran system audits from the main dome's ops station. He was quieter than usual, fingers moving across the screen like a pianist playing a melody only he could hear. I watched the lines of code scroll, protocols from a dozen systems stitched together like patchwork skin. "Something's off," he muttered. "Besides the hidden shaft into the unregistered sublevels of a silent colony?" He didn't smile, just pointed at a repeating cluster of code. "See that? That loop's not native to the colony OS. It's a fallback diagnostic program, buried deep in ECC research node firmware, circa 30 years ago. It shouldn't even be compatible with the systems up here." "Why is it running?" He hesitated. "Because something down there keeps calling it." I looked closer. The loop was labeled Event Trace, Infra-Behavioral Response Mode, Cycle 77A. It was pinging the upper systems every 6 minutes, requesting a single line of input. Operator Emotional Index, stable, escalating, submissive, aggressive. I stared at the screen. "You're telling me the base is asking how we feel?" Locke nodded. "Not with words, with patterns. It's testing responses, cross-referencing our movements against predicted behavior trees." I leaned back, rubbing the bridge of my nose. Old habits. 1,000 briefings and no prep for this. "So what happens if it doesn't like the answer?" Locke didn't reply. We drilled the next day. Seth laid controlled charges along the outer edge of the shaft plate. No standard explosives, just kinetic pop bolts designed to break anchor tension without breaching the structure. He worked in complete silence, even as Locke and I double-checked the wiring. When the plate finally hissed free and rose like a slow aperture, the shaft yawned open beneath us, black as a prison dream. Floodlights revealed a platform 30 meters down. Steel, smooth, etched with grid lines. The elevator. No visible controls, no handrails. Just a void in the machine waiting at the bottom like an open hand. Seth stepped onto it first. Locke followed, checking the corners, running his handheld scanner in tight arcs. Miles took his place beside me, calm as always. I waited one more moment before stepping on. The platform didn't jolt, didn't buzz, just began to lower, slow and precise, as if following a command none of us had given. Above us, the circle of light shrank to a coin, then a pinprick, then nothing. Beneath us, the dark began to shape itself into walls. "Stroud," Locke said quietly. "We ever find out what they used this place for?" I didn't look at him. "We're about to." The elevator stopped without sound. One moment we were descending through black. The next, stillness held us in place, like the air itself had gone taut. There was no floor marker, no artificial chime to announce arrival, only a change in pressure that made my ears tick. Locke tapped his boot twice on the metal beneath us. "Pressure sensor, not weight. It doesn't care how many of us came down," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His fingers twitched near his interface port like he wanted to plug in and peel back whatever skin this place wore. But something held him back. The platform hadn't attached to a wall. It hovered by unseen guidance, seamless against a structure so clean it almost seemed erased. Edges smoothed into long curves that made depth hard to judge. I stepped off first. My boots clicked against the floor with a softness that felt deliberate. Material, color, even acoustics, none of it matched standard ECC build. The surface wasn't concrete. It looked like matte steel from a distance, but underfoot it gave slightly, like walking on stone laminated with pressure gel. The corridor ahead branched 3 ways, though nothing marked the junction. Even the lights were wrong. Amber lines embedded flush with the ceiling, glowing evenly like sun through storm clouds. They responded to proximity, brightening half a beat before we reached each segment. Miles stepped in behind me, breathing slow, eyes moving with surgical calculation. He didn't seem surprised. If anything, he looked as though the base was behaving exactly how he expected it to. We chose the center corridor. The walls were seamless, jointless, interrupted only by panels that resembled security access points but lacked interfaces. Locke pressed his palm to one and waited. Nothing. He tilted his head, pressed his ear close. Still nothing. "They're not offline," he said. "They're indifferent." As we passed the third panel, a voice whispered from somewhere just behind us, a single breath of sound, barely articulated syllables like a degraded audio log skipping on old tape. I turned sharply. No one was there. Seth stopped moving entirely, shoulders squared, like a predator waiting for motion to chase. "You heard that," I said, half question, half accusation. Seth didn't answer with words, just raised one hand, fingers curled slightly, listening. Locke turned his head toward me, one eyebrow raised. "You sure you're hearing it and not remembering it?" The corridor curved and the lights curved with it, keeping us in a cone of muted amber. Eventually, we emerged into a chamber too large to see all at once. A convergent space, broad, high-ceilinged, the walls broken by what looked like reinforced observation bays, each one sunken a meter lower than the next in a spiraling configuration. A soft hum, not mechanical but tonal, carried in the space, like the resonance of a plucked wire 1,000 miles long. In the center of the room, an interface column rose from the floor. A shallow pattern flowed across it like breath condensed on glass. Locke approached, waving his wrist tool. The system reacted instantly, lines of light branching up the column and spilling across the floor in grids that mapped our movements. He stared, fingers moving slowly over his tool. It's tracking behavior in real time. Orientation, gait, posture, heartbeat. Every interaction in this room has a corresponding output signal, like it's mimicking us. "Training?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Or reacting, or both. I think this place learns by watching." Seth crouched near the edge of the central dais, one hand trailing along the floor. His expression never changed, but his fingertips traced a spiral until he stopped and pressed down once, firmly. A door opened across the room. No visible mechanism, just wall, then aperture. The space beyond was colder, though the temperature hadn't changed. My HUD confirmed that. Still, the sensation crawled through my skin in a way that technical metrics couldn't refute. Inside, a row of chairs faced an empty wall, worn in the seat cushions like they'd been used often. Each one bore a single data port embedded in the backrest and a footlock recessed into the floor. A simulation pod array, early-generation behavioral chambers. I'd seen models like this on Titan, years before everything went to ash. They were used for subconscious reinforcement training, repeating drills until motor functions bypassed cognition entirely. ECC had discontinued them after half a dozen operators started reenacting combat patterns in their sleep. That's what they said in the reports, anyway. Locke moved toward one of the pods, his face oddly still. "These weren't here for testing," he said. "These were conditioning tools, feedback loop models." "Looping what?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Whatever they didn't want people to forget or disobey." Miles brushed a hand over one pod's port. "Stroud, look at this." I moved beside him. The data port was coded with a user tag, scratched into the casing by hand. It read, "Operator Stroud, Pattern 9A, clearance, feedback null." "That's your name," Locke said, "but this is older than any record of you in the system." "Maybe someone reused the name," I said, voice quieter than I liked. Locke's eyes narrowed. "Maybe the system did." A cold spike of recognition twisted low in my gut. Something older than thought. I took a step back as if distance could loosen the grip of it. Then Seth said, "Door," and we all turned. The aperture we'd entered through was sealed, seamless. I moved to the wall, pressed my palm flat against it. "Manual override?" Locke was already scanning it. "No sign of override panels, it just decided." Miles didn't move. "It's measuring us." I turned on him. "You knew this might happen." "I knew it could. That's why I'm here." "For command?" He met my eyes without flinching. "For the experiment." The words landed like impact rounds. Before I could speak, a sound rolled through the wall, a low-frequency pulse, almost felt more than heard, like a heartbeat slowed to glacial pace. It repeated, 3 times. Then a new door opened on the far side of the chamber. Through it came the sound of boots, fast, uneven, uncoordinated. A figure stumbled into view, wearing partial recon armor, breach-scarred, mismatched. A man, pale, gasping. He fell to his knees. We moved instantly. Seth reached him first, holding position without touching. The man looked up. His face was veined with dark threads running beneath the skin like ink spilled under pressure. His eyes were glossy, tracking shadows only he could see. His mouth moved. I leaned down. His voice emerged in a whisper stitched with distortion. "Pattern mismatch. Override. Test failed. Reset requested." His eyes locked on mine. "Stroud?" Then he seized, arched. A wet crack echoed through the chamber as his back bent too far and something inside him tore. From his mouth spilled a thick black fluid, riddled with glittering specks of metallic dust. His body convulsed once more, then silence. Seth closed his eyes. His hands were stained to the wrist, but his face didn't change. Miles knelt by the corpse. "This wasn't infection," he said. "It was rejection." I stared at him. "Rejection of what?" He looked up. "Identity." Locke set a containment charge around the remains and initiated sterilization protocol. His version, not ECC's. He jury-rigged the ignition from spare capacitor rings and surplus anti-mold suppressant. The whole thing flared hot enough to bake skin at 5 meters. But when the smoke cleared, what lay at the center of the blast zone hadn't broken down the way tissue should. The outer layers blackened and blistered, but the veins, the filaments that threaded through that poor bastard's neck and jaw and gut, held together like fiber weave, like cable. Locke just stared for a long moment, hand hovering near his scanner, then lowered it without activating. "Something grew in him," he said finally, "and whatever it was, it doesn't metabolize like us." We left the chamber without speaking, through a different passage than we'd entered, because the one we came through never opened again. Stroud, Pattern 9A. Clearance, feedback null. That label had been waiting for me in the pod array, etched by hand or machine. It didn't matter. Deep Black had called me by name before I said a word to it. I kept turning that over in my mind, cycling it through different possibilities. A coincidence, a prediction model, an echo of someone else I'd never met. All of those would have made sense. Clean, compartmentalized, manageable. But none of them felt true. The corridor beyond the simulation bay sloped downward at a shallow angle, curved just enough that the far end remained hidden no matter how far we walked. That was deliberate, I was sure of it. The design here wasn't human-friendly. It didn't provide orientation cues. No lines to follow, no texture shifts to signal thresholds, just continuity. A single, uninterrupted procession. It was Miles who broke the silence. He moved at the rear, calm as always, but something in his voice had softened, just a touch, a hairline fracture. "This level is part of the memory stack," he said. Locke turned his head. "Define that." Miles slowed. Project Deep Black had a secondary function beyond augmentation. After the failures on Phobos, they shifted focus toward imprint persistence, training the environment to respond to human patterns even when humans weren't present. They weren't trying to build perfect soldiers. They were trying to build architecture that remembered how soldiers behaved, systems that adapted. I glanced back. "You said imprint persistence. You mean it stores neural data?" "Yes. Patterns, routines, vocal profiles, biometric variants, movement under stress. The goal was to develop a base that didn't require direction. One that could anticipate the needs of its occupants and correct deviation." "Correct," Locke repeated dryly. "Such a beautiful little euphemism." We came to another door. This one didn't open right away. Seth stepped forward and placed a single hand against the center. The surface throbbed beneath his palm rhythmically. A dim bloom of violet radiated outward from his contact point in 5 symmetrical waves. The light didn't illuminate the hall. It existed only in response to him. The door split down the center, parting like a lens dilating, revealing a narrow threshold. He didn't look back, just walked through. Inside, the space felt taller, vaulted, almost cathedral-like, though it wasn't ornate in any traditional sense. The ceiling stretched out in dark relief above us, held aloft by massive rib-like supports that curved and twisted, as if the room had grown around something too large to be buried all at once. The walls were matte white, though the surface wasn't smooth, closer to exposed tendon beneath half-translucent skin. Lining both sides of the chamber were display columns, each one housing what looked like segmented figures, bodies in cross-section, suspended in vertical resonance fields. They weren't corpses, they weren't living either. They were snapshots, states of being held in perfect stasis. I recognized some of the armor variants, old generation exosuits mixed with biotech rigs I'd only ever seen in deep classified briefings. "What is this?" I asked. Locke moved forward, scanning one of the columns. His voice went flat. "These are not medical samples." He tapped a code into his wrist display and forced one of the pods to release its optical shell. The field retracted with a glassy whine, revealing a woman's upper torso, fused into a partial exosuit, her face placid, eyes open, not blinking. There was a nameplate embedded in the pod base. "Commander Alina Hart, templating cycle 4.7, repetition threshold unresolved." Miles exhaled slowly. She was part of the Phobos team. "She's dead," I said. Miles shook his head. "Not to the base." Seth had moved to the center of the room. He knelt, head bowed, hands resting on his thighs. As I watched, the lights above shifted color, from pale white to a soft blue wash that matched the hue of his scars. He opened his mouth and said a word I didn't recognize. The room responded. A hidden wall at the far end folded inward, revealing a narrow platform with a data port, larger than standard, embedded with 5 concentric rings of glyphs that looked halfway between machine code and scripture. No one moved. Locke whispered, almost to himself, "It's interpreting him as authorized." "What?" I asked. He stepped closer, hand held out like he could shield himself with intention alone. "Seth, the base is reading him as part of the system, his biorhythms syncing with the environmental loop." Seth stood slowly. "It hears what aligns. What does that mean?" I asked. He turned to face me. There was no madness in his expression, just certainty. "It remembers resonance. It understands shape." I spoke truth. I didn't understand it, not really, but the room had opened for him. That much was undeniable. Miles was watching Seth carefully now, his face taut with tension that hadn't been there before. He's synchronizing with a system we don't understand. That's a variable we cannot afford. "You want to pull him out?" I asked. "I want to understand what it's doing to him." "He walked through a door you couldn't open, which should concern you." "It does." Miles's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he turned toward the data port. He pulled a line from his wrist and jacked into the lowest ring. "Let's see what it thinks it knows." The reaction was instant. The room dimmed. The pod displays shut down. The walls shivered once like a breath caught between two thoughts, and then the floor beneath us bloomed into light. A holographic interface unfolded across the chamber, sprawling outward in geometric layers. At the center, a network map rendered itself, nodes spiraling outward like nerve clusters. Each was labeled with a name, a sequence, a behavior type. Dozens of them, hundreds. I recognized some of the tags, names of operatives lost in black projects going back 30 years. And at the edge, one cluster glowed brighter than the others. 4 nodes linked. Our biosigns. Live. It was tracking us. Miles stepped back, his face pale. "This isn't surveillance, it's integration." The projection shifted and the center restructured. A new cluster began rendering. One built from our own. A synthetic overlap. Behavioral echoes. The system wasn't just observing, it was replicating us. Locke stepped forward, hands curled into fists. "It's building a scenario tree based on us. Inputs, reactions, stress thresholds. This whole facility is an extrapolation engine, and we just fed it a new set." Seth walked into the light. It rippled around him, adjusting, sinking. Miles moved to intercept, but Seth raised one hand. "The question is no longer whether we survive," he said. "The question is whether we leave ourselves behind." "What are you talking about?" I asked. Seth looked at me with the calm certainty of someone who no longer feared his own purpose. "It is not recording. It is becoming." I stared at him. Locke whispered, "It doesn't need us to stay. It just needs enough to run the loop." "And once the simulation stabilizes," Miles said, "we become obsolete." I looked around at the room, the pods, the lingering holograms, at my own name etched into a pod built before I was ever sentenced. "This isn't about sealing a black site," I said. Locke met my eyes. "No, it's about finishing an experiment." And I knew then, in my bones and in the ghost of that place that had already mapped us down to our last breath, that the base wasn't hunting us. It was training us for replacement. There was no way to mark the point we passed from structure into system. It didn't announce itself with changes in architecture or temperature, only in the way the air seemed to pull slightly against your skin, as if pressure gradients were adjusting microscopically with every step we took, anticipating movement before muscles fired. The floor beneath us shifted from matte industrial plating to a pale surface flecked with nodules, like bone crosscut with polished alloy. It didn't echo when we walked. It recorded. Seth walked ahead without hesitation, and the walls responded to him, folding open in rhythmic, petal-like segments that didn't close behind us so much as vanish. He had become, for lack of a better word, a passkey, a living handshake protocol that Deep Black no longer questioned. His silence felt less like a choice now and more like alignment. His presence tuned to the ambient logic of the facility. and the facility, for its part, responded like an organ recognizing one of its own cells. Locke said nothing as we descended into the lowest sublevel, but I could see it in his face. Eyes moving faster than his steps, jaw tense, left hand tapping along his side in a rhythm too precise to be accidental. I'd come to recognize that twitch. It meant his mind was running live simulations, branching possibility trees, tallying outcomes with clinical paranoia. He didn't ask questions now. There were no answers left to mine, only actions. Miles trailed last, gun holstered, posture relaxed but wound tight beneath it. He didn't try to lead anymore. Something in the previous chamber had broken through whatever detachment he wore like armor. I watched him more closely now, not out of suspicion, but because I had the sinking feeling that Miles had come here already knowing how it would end, and now he was realizing he wasn't in charge of that ending after all. The corridor opened into a chamber that defied layout. It wasn't vast exactly, at least not in the way your eyes tried to measure space, but the proportions felt alien. No hard corners. The ceiling stretched at a height that flickered when you looked too long, like depth was being rendered in real time based on where your attention landed. The walls shifted with slow, organic rhythms, their texture too fine to track. From a distance, they looked smooth. Up close, you could see etched filaments threading through them like circuitry carved into living tissue. Memory made flesh. At the center stood the core. It rose from the floor in quiet layers, a conical spire built from interlocking strata of old-world tech and something newer, sleeker, whisper-thin, breathing faint glows of color. The base was concrete and titanium, ancient military rigging stamped with faded serials. But the upper shell shimmered with reactive particles that rearranged as we approached, shapes flowing across its surface like the ghost of language. Embedded into one side was a console, not a screen, but a depression shaped to accept touch, movement, perhaps even thought. It didn't blink or request input, it simply waited. Locke stopped 3 paces short. It's projecting a stable pattern now, no longer reactive. I stepped up beside him. Explain. It's not adapting anymore. It's settled on a scenario, a solution. He turned toward me. We're the dataset now. Final configuration. It ran the simulation, and we passed the threshold. I looked at the structure. Then this is the result? He nodded. Or the invitation. The console shimmered just slightly, and I felt something tighten in my chest. A physiological echo, like déjà vu built from someone else's memory. I reached for it. My hand stopped inches short. You don't have to touch it, Miles said. It's already registered you. I turned. And what does it want? He looked past me, into the core. Confirmation. All its input loops run on incomplete datasets. It needs consent to stabilize the model. One more decision point, one more act of will. That's what it never had. That's what killed the project. And if I give it that? His voice didn't waver. Then the system integrates. It becomes the next generation protocol. Adaptive, self-replicating, a base that builds soldiers without soldiers. I stepped back. And if I don't? His answer came too fast. Then the system deconstructs, fades. Locke's eyes narrowed. You mean resets? Miles said nothing. Seth moved closer to the console, but his hand did not reach for it. He simply stood beside it and began to whisper, a slow cadence in a language I couldn't identify. The walls responded with the faintest tremor, like a sigh released from a deep cavity. I turned toward Miles. You knew what this was, before the drop, before the briefing. I suspected, he admitted. You didn't come here to stop it. You came here to see if someone would finish it. He didn't answer. How many teams before us? Miles looked at the core. 4, maybe 5. None made it this far. None triggered the stable state. I stared at him, then at the console again. What happens if we walk away? I asked. The system degrades, slowly, but it retains everything. Next team gets a cleaner version, a more precise pattern. He paused. Eventually, someone triggers the stable loop. It was always a matter of time. And that's when I understood. We hadn't been sent to investigate or to neutralize. We were the next data set. A fresh scenario. See how these operators react. Feed the loop, record outcomes, adjust, refine. Locke shook his head, half in disbelief, half in recognition. Every time someone turns away, it learns, fails better next time. That's why it knew my name, I said. Not from a list, from design. It's been building toward me, towards someone like me. And now you get to decide, Miles said. Complete the loop, or end it. I looked at him, then at Locke, at Seth, who seemed more integrated than human now, his breathing matching the cadence of the walls. We'd gone too deep to be certain of anything. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to serve as a blueprint for whatever they wanted this place to become. I stepped to the side of the core and opened my satchel. Inside, 3 collapsible charges, low-yield breachers configured for structural destabilization. Not high enough to crater the base, but enough to bring down this chamber. Enough to sever the core from the power grid, fry its central logic, and collapse the behavioral matrix into scrambled code. Locke stepped beside me without a word. He pulled a 4th from his own pack. We set on proximity, 10-second delay. If it changes its mind and tries to disarm, it'll trigger anyway. I nodded once. Miles took a step forward. You'll destroy years of data. A legacy built on billions. You can't stop what it represents. I don't care what it represents. It's already inside you. Don't pretend you're above it. I'm not, but it doesn't get to finish the sentence in my name. Miles reached for his sidearm, but Seth was faster. He didn't draw a weapon. He only raised one hand and whispered a word. The lights shifted to violet and the floor beneath Miles's feet reshaped itself, just enough to throw his balance. He stumbled, then froze as the wall behind him projected his own vitals in a looping echo. Heart rate, reflex threshold, emotional calibration. He saw what the base had made of him. And for the first time, Miles looked afraid. I didn't authorize this, he whispered. The wall said nothing, but the loop continued. Locke finished arming the last charge. It doesn't need your permission anymore. I stepped back toward the center of the chamber, holding the trigger. I looked at Seth. Are you staying? He met my eyes, calm, serene. I was already part of it. He closed his eyes. I looked to Locke. 10 seconds. 10 seconds, he confirmed. I nodded once and reached for the detonator. My thumb found the activation pad. The indicator flashed green, and we ran, boots hitting floor and breath drawn hard between clenched teeth. The chamber behind us didn't react. Deep Black simply watched us go, like it had already decided this was part of the pattern. Maybe it had always been. We moved fast, past the ribbed vaults and the data spires, past the looping grid of light still blooming from the core, now beginning to tremble along its lowest threads. The air thickened as we climbed, like the structure was exhaling around us, shedding pressure. When we reached the shaft, the elevator was already there, waiting. Its surface was spotless, polished steel, centered in the dark, lit from below by a single pale ring that traced the platform's edge like a halo. We stepped onto it. The moment our weight shifted onto the pad, the elevator began to rise. The ascent was silent. No gears, no hydraulics, just movement, slow and smooth, like being lifted by thought alone. Below us, the core chamber vanished floor by floor, its geometry curling inward behind our retreat like a closing aperture. No shockwave followed, just distance, and a growing absence that settled in my chest heavier than anything I could name. By the time we reached the upper sublevels, the light in the corridor had dimmed, like the system had stopped compensating for human presence. Terminals we passed flickered, then blacked out. Doors remained sealed behind us. We were being let go. When we emerged into the colony dome, everything was still. The overhead lights were down to emergency glow, pale amber sinking into grey steel. Monitors along the inner ring displayed static. Some didn't display anything at all. The air was too quiet. Not dead, just final. Like a broadcast had ended, and the silence wasn't failure. It was closure. I walked out toward the uplink platform, where the transmission array still stood, low-band, hard-coded, analog, the kind of thing that couldn't be spoofed or rerouted. I keyed in the signal. The screen blinked once, awaiting message. I typed slowly. Mission concluded. Do not send another. The beacon flashed, then sent. A burst packet encrypted and stripped of trace. That was all ECC would get. I stayed there for a while, standing on the platform beneath a thin dome of alloy glass. Through it, the sky above Gorgon 4 stretched in shifting blues and greens, a high atmosphere streaked with hydrocarbon haze and the ghostly trail of Thalos rising on the horizon. There was no sign of response. No blinking comm light, no overhead drone humming back with clearance or orders or exfil code. Just wind moving across the outer ridge, low and dry, stirring ash that didn't belong to fire. The planet had gone back to sleep. Somewhere behind me, Locke sat down against the wall of the comm tower, legs stretched out in front of him, eyes closed. His breathing was steady. He wasn't asleep, he never really slept, but I could tell his mind was still running loops, replaying every variable, every move we made, watching the simulation collapse in his head. Miles stood a few meters off, arms folded, staring out toward the far perimeter of the dome, where the terrain vanished into that rust-colored horizon. He hadn't said much since the core. Whatever mask he'd worn through the mission, calculated, clinical, performative, had slipped. Maybe he was taking stock. Maybe he was waiting for orders that weren't coming. Or maybe, like me, he was finally learning what it meant to be out of the loop. Whatever was down there, whatever pieces of us the system had tried to preserve, to mirror, to rewrite, it had failed. Because at the end, when it asked for confirmation, when it held the door open and waited for someone to choose integration, I said no. I didn't know if ECC would retrieve us. Maybe we'd die here. Maybe another shuttle would arrive in 2 weeks with a fresh team and another set of names for the loop to digest. But maybe the message stuck. I couldn't be sure, but I was sure of this. I had made the call. Mine. Not assigned, not extrapolated, not fed into a behavioral tree or trained into a loop. Not the reflex of someone too broken to question the orders. The loop stopped here. It ended with me, and Deep Black didn't get to replicate that.